Ecuador's democracy is in deep trouble. Just days ago, Fernando Villavicencio, a member of the national legislature and a presidential candidate, was assassinated in broad daylight. The shocking incident has highlighted Ecuador's booming drug war. And it has also eclipsed a political battle over climate justice. Not only will voters have to pick a new president on August 20th, but also decide on a ballot measure that allows for a major fossil fuel reserve to be left unextracted. We turn now to Gabriela Barzalo, journalist and media entrepreneur based in New York City and Latin America. Her work focuses on human rights, the environment, and social justice with an emphasis on solutions. Her writing has appeared in media outlets in the US and Latin America, including Al Jazeera, Vice, etc. She's a fellow of the Solutions Journalism Network, and she just published a story in Yes magazine recently entitled Biodiversity on the Ballot in Ecuador. Welcome to the program, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Sonali, for having me here today.
So, first, let's talk about the political turmoil itself in Ecuador. Although you wrote about this ballot measure around fossil fuel extraction in a remote indigenous occupied part of the Amazon, the issue of this assassination of this presidential candidate has consumed news headlines. And I'm wondering if you have any general thoughts about what that means for Ecuador's democracy, in as much as it relates to the environmental movement in Ecuador.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this question. Right now, Ecuador is going through a very complicated situation. We have seen unthinkable levels of violence, especially this year. There is 66% of violent deaths in 2023 so far. And I think that this has a connection with the upcoming referendum, because this upcoming Sunday, Ecuadorians will vote not only for president, but also for the environmental referendum. But right now, due to the insecurity, Ecuadorians are thinking twice about whether or not going to vote. So this can really affect the upcoming referendum as well.
So, just in terms of turnout, you're worried that people may not show up in large enough numbers because of the fear in the nation?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. There is a fear among Ecuadorians to show up and vote this Sunday.
And yet, just the mere act of getting on the ballot, this question of whether or not to tap into a fossil fuel reserve has been a huge victory. Let's get into that. That's a topic of your Yes Magazine article, where you discuss how the Yasuni National Park is the site of this battle. Tell me about the park itself. Tell me about the area of the Amazon rainforest and the role that it plays in fossil fuel reserves and extraction in Ecuador.
Yeah, so the Yasuni National Park is a UNESCO biosphere, and it's one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It spans nearly 2,000 hectares, and it is also home to the Tagaeri and Taromenani people, who are one of the last indigenous peoples living in voluntary isolation. And I believe that right now, this referendum represents a historic opportunity for Ecuador to become the first country to decide on the future of oil extraction in the Amazon, to decide whether or not Ecuadorian citizens want to keep oil underground. And also, I would say that this decision is historic for two reasons. First, because it's the first time that citizens of a country have the opportunity to engage in direct democracy, to vote on natural resources, and to express their support for nature, human rights, and the autonomy of indigenous peoples living in voluntary isolation. And I think that the Yasuni case could set a precedent that can be replicated in other countries as well. That can change the economic model, and especially for oil exploitation in the Amazon rainforest, and not only in the Ecuadorian Amazon, but also in the entire Amazonian region, which is composed of 9 countries in South America.
Well, let's talk about what Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador at the time, had a few years ago, had actually attempted to do to keep the oil in the ground. He had come up with kind of an ingenious idea. I mean, poorer nations or lower income nations in places like Latin America have felt that they've needed to rely on their fossil fuel resources in order to have economic prosperity, right? Venezuela is a good case in point, and they have to compete with Western nations like the US and Canada, and Russia, who made their wealth on fossil fuels. And so Rafael Correa, who is self-styled liberal, instead of initially wanting to extract fossil fuels, asked the world to pay Ecuador to keep the oil in the ground. So tell me that story and what happened to it.
Yeah. So, well, to really understand like the significance of this referendum on a global scale, we must reflect back to 10 years ago when, or maybe further, in 2007, then President Correa introduced an initiative to keep more than 800 million barrels of oil underground within the Yasuni ITT field in an effort to protect the area's biodiversity and indigenous people, while also preventing carbon emissions. And in exchange, he was looking for a contribution of 3.6 billion from the international community. But a couple of years later, in 2013, the initiative only raised 13 million toward that goal. So therefore, Correa canceled the initiative and abandoned the plan. And he asked to the National Congress for permission to start exploiting the ITT field. And since then, the Yasuni ITT field has been exploited, generating over 50,000 barrels per day.
So he was asking for the world to pay Ecuador to keep the oil in the ground, which is actually a good idea, but it didn't work. Out of 3 point something billion dollars, only 13 million was pledged. So what has the impact of the oil? So then he, of course, pivoted to the oil extraction. What did that generate, not just in terms of carbon emissions, but how did that impact the Yasuni people, the indigenous people who live there? And tell me the story of the youth-led activism that has then developed, that you profile in your story, the Yasunidos.
Yeah. So in response to Correa's decision, a group of youth and a group of environmental activists, feminists, indigenous peoples from all over Ecuador decide to organize and create the Yasunidos collective. They were pushing for a referendum so that Ecuadorians could decide oil extraction in the Amazon rainforest. And well, I mentioned that this referendum holds historical significance, and I said that because I think that it also exemplifies the power of grassroots and youth activism, because this referendum has become possible due to the unstoppable efforts of the Yasunidos collective. It was formed 10 years ago, and they came together, and since 2013, they have been advocating not only for the Yasuni National Park, but also for all other environmental issues in the country. They have been like criticizing all the negative effects that the oil industry has provoked in Ecuador, which are oil spills, massive contamination, and degradation. Unfortunately, Ecuador has a very complex history with the oil industry involving ecocide, impunity, contamination. We have witnessed crimes, destruction, and poverty. And as a journalist, I've heard countless stories of abuses in communities, and the oil industry has only served to divide this community. So Yas Unidos emerged as a response to not only to the oil exploitation in the Yasuni, but in the whole Ecuadorian Amazon.
And I understand that it was really initiated by young people. You said it's been around for about 10 years. Tell me who the Yasunidos are. Are they not just diverse in age, but also diverse in race? Are they indigenous and non indigenous Ecuadorians?
Yeah, most of the Unidos are actually not indigenous. They live in urban areas. They live in Quito, Cuenca, which are the main cities of Ecuador. And it's funny, I mean, it is interesting because sometimes, like, I was born and raised in Ecuador, but the first time that I went to the Amazon rainforest was about 5 years ago. So Ecuadorians, sometimes we don't have a direct connection with the Amazon rainforest, and that's why the work that Yas Unidos has been doing for over a decade is important, because this is not only a matter of indigenous people. The Amazon rainforest belongs to all Ecuadorians, and they organize to share that, to raise awareness about our Amazon region, our natural resources, and to stand up for human rights, indigenous rights, and yeah.